Michael Unger here from the MacMillan Space Centre, here with another episode of Ask an Astronomer, almost getting to the last throes of summer. And with that, we have our astronomer, Marley. How's it going, Marley?
It's good. ABBA released 2 new songs today, so I'm having the best day ever.
Holy smokes. Okay, I was just outside in our observatory and there was a plane that had like one of those banners, one of those advertising banners, and it said ABBA is back.
Yes.
And I was so confused. I was like, wait, what? ABBA's back?
Yes, they are. They just announced, they released 2 new songs, 2 singles, a new album, and they also announced that they're going to be doing a live show in, I think, 2022.
Well, here you go, folks. We have breaking news on space and ABBA right here on Ask an Astronomer. If you are out there watching, put into the chat what your favorite ABBA song is. And also, if you have any questions for Marley about anything to do about space, anything under the cosmos, you can put there in that live chat. We will answer them. But we have some news stories, and no, they aren't an update from the fire alarm from our last episode, Ask an Astronomer, which was just a false alarm. It didn't seem like a false alarm at the time. It was very loud in my ear over here. Marley got out safe. We both got out safe, but it was a false alarm. But we do have some news that's going up in space. First off, let's start off with some plants in space news. I didn't know plants could grow in space, Marley.
No, they've been growing there for quite a while, actually. The plants in space have been up there growing things, and there's lots of reasons as to why. But yeah, we did get a new science delivery this past week, and taking out the cargo is underway. So Crew 65 got a delivery from the SpaceX Cargo Dragon. And a big part of this load was space botany and space plant science. And the experiment is called Apex-08. So space botany is an important part of the research going on in the space station. And it has to do a lot with us wanting to go further into space and for longer amounts of time. So currently the astronauts get freeze-dried food and stuff like that. But the problem with freeze-drying the food and sending it out for long shipments is that the vitamins in the food start to deteriorate over time. And as well as like getting the shipments to them becomes harder and harder. So having fresh fruits and vegetables on board would be a lot better, especially for longer missions. So this is a part of Veggie, which is their onboard space garden, and it provides them with nutrients, and it also enhances happiness. There's a lot of psychological benefits to having something green and growing around you. And so having those also improves not only the astronaut's mental state, but also their nutritional state. And so the garden here is about the size of a carry-on luggage and holds 6 plants. And the reason it's this magenta pink color is that plants reflect a lot of green light, and they use light that's more in the blue and red wavelengths. So they give plants that type of light so they can grow better, which is why we get this magenta-y color here.
Oh, that's so cool. So what kind of actual plants are these that they're growing, Marley?
So the ones that this experiment talks about, Apex-08 experiment deals with, is this plant called the Thale cress is one of its common names. It's a small flowering plant native to Eurasia and Africa, and is actually considered a weed. And scientists routinely use this plant for research based on its properties and how fast it grows and things like that. So the experiment they're doing right now is going to help determine the effect of stress of being in microgravity will have on the plant. So growing on Earth and growing in space are 2 very different things. And so they want to investigate that some more. And so what they've done is genetically alter the plant that they've sent up, and they will cause a response in a group of compounds that control responses to environmental stress. And then they will be installed in the Veggie plant growth system, their little space garden on the space station. And they'll be grown under the LED lights, and they'll germinate. And 9 days later, the plants will be harvested and preserved in cold storage before being returned to Earth, where scientists on Earth will perform gene expression analysis on these plants, look at their genes, and compare them to plants grown on Earth to see if there was any difference with what they did.
But I guess the more important question is, can they eat this? This is, for astronauts that are up there, they get a lot of freeze-dried food already. I'm sure they're dying for some fresh vegetables.
I don't think so. I feel like it'd be very bitter, but they do have lettuce and things that grow on the space station as well, which is nice, but I would die, I think, kill for a nectarine if I were up there.
So I guess the other next question would be, when are we going to start working on potatoes like Mark Watney did when he got to Mars? Because that would actually be the next, that would be sustainable. You could maybe just have a couple potatoes for dinner. I'm not sure if you could just eat one of these plants and that would be fulfilling for a meal.
Yeah, these plants are not going to be eaten. They're just up there for science, specifically to look at these things called polyamines, which are found in most organisms, if not all of them. And they are used to, in plants at least, they help with plant growth and stress tolerance, but they also help with flower development and fruit maturation and development. So really studying these polyamines, which are these molecules, are kind of like the backbone of growing things in space, because that depends on they help with fruit maturation and they help with stress tolerance. And being in microgravity is actually very stressful for plants. And so in previous research and previous experiments that they did, they looked at plants that grew in microgravity environments, and they showed an evidence of stress on a molecular, like a structural level, like the very structure of the plant had been changed because of the stress it had grown in. And so this evidence, it suggested the stress response occurred due to the way that the plant genes were being expressed. And so usually the pathways that polyamines go on, they're switched on. So there are specific genes that contribute to the switching on of the polyamine pathways. And so when they compared the plants that were grown in microgravity to those grown on Earth, there was no difference between these specific genes. So in this diagram, I tried to show plants that were in a rocket ship grown in stressful conditions, for some reason, didn't have that stress pathway, that polyamine pathway activated, and the plant died of stress and did not do as well. Whereas the plants grown on Earth, they also didn't have that stress thing turned on because they weren't under stress. They were growing as normal and they produced a healthy plant. So for whatever reason, this specific stress mitigation pathway with the polyamines was not activated. And so that was very confusing to them. You'd think that if a plant was under stress, it would release its mitigation, but for whatever reason, it didn't do this in microgravity.
Okay. Well, other things that stress out plants is negligence, which is something that I'm very much prone to. So maybe I should be looking into some of this research. But so what's really the next step, do you think, Marley? Are they getting closer to being able to create lush vegetation? There was this movie that came out in the 70s that it had a space station. I can't remember the name of it right now. Silent Spring was the name of a book. But there was a whole space station. It was just like a jungle that they had grown in there. Like, how far away are we from potentially having something like that?
I think we're still pretty far away, because we're still working on this right now, and trying to figure out exactly how this happens. So it's not super well understood, right? Like, we've only been able really to grow plants on Earth this whole time. And so growing them in space is a whole different ballpark. And so now what they're doing is, their hypothesis is that this lack of the pathway in microgravity was the reason for this increased stress. And so by that reasoning, they can reduce the stress response by genetically engineering the polyamine pathway. So making this pathway activate under a different means by genetically altering the plant. And so that's kind of where they're at now and what they're testing right now with this Apex-08 experiment. So I think that we're still really far away from having a space forest of any kind.
By the way, there was Silent Running. That was the sci-fi film I was trying to think of. Post-apocalyptic science film. Really cool special effects done by the same person that did 2001. I'm sure nobody's seen it. It was very little seen. But this is great. This is looking like some really cool science. So keep tabs on this space. Keep tabs on the NASA site that most of this science came to, right, Marley?
Yeah, this is all from the NASA site. So there's actually, if you go to the International Space Station section on the NASA website, you can actually go to the current experiments, and all of the data from this experiment will actually be publicly available because it is under public domain. And so different labs and stuff can have access to it.
Awesome. So if you have any questions about space plants, get in there on the chat. We have some breaking news, though, to let everyone about that's going on. We've been talking a lot about Perseverance on the red planet, keeping tabs on digging the dirt. If you were here last episode, we had some problems, or Perseverance had some challenges digging into the dirt. But Marley, you were scouring and looking at the updates this morning, and you found something.
I did. I was looking a lot. So just for background, this is Perseverance's second attempt at taking a sample from a rock. And so this is Rochette. This is the rock that Perseverance did take a sample from now, the second one. And it's located in the Citadel region, which is what they're calling the specific region it's in. And so the first step of getting the sample was to actually abrade the rock, which is just creating a small little test patch to see how the rock handles it, because the surface of the rock is dramatically affected by the environment of Mars. And so the rock below the surface may actually hold different information and lots of clues about the rock formation as opposed to the top. And so this image here shows the rock before abrasion and the rock after abrasion. So they kind of cut away the top part to be able to see what's underneath. And then they take a sample from it. But I want to remind you that this image here is from the Mastcam Z instrument, which shows a sample tube inside the coring bit after the attempt on August 6, 2021 coring activity was completed. So the bronze colored outer bit is the coring bit, the actual bit that does the coring, and the light colored inner ring is the sample tube, which is a bit hard to see in here, but you can kind of see its serial number here. And so what happened with this experiment, this attempt, was that they got results that they had taken a sample and that it had been stowed properly, but when they did further testing, it was empty. And so they added another step into the acquisition of the sample. And that is that after the drills into the rock, it takes a photo with the Mastcam Z instruments of what's in the tube, because what was in the tube, they think just didn't come out, and the tube was empty in the first attempt. And so for the second attempt, they added an extra step to take a picture of the tube before it gets sealed and stowed away inside Perseverance. And they haven't made any formal announcement, but this was done about September 1st ish. It's all local mean solar time, which I haven't converted into Pacific Standard Time, but they take a picture. And so this happened just a few days ago, and the raw images come in pretty quickly, but they haven't been processed and there's been no formal announcement. But this is a picture from its attempt on September 1st, 2021, or Sol 190 at local mean standard time of 12:39, 59 seconds. And so this looks like a pretty intact sample to me. So we've got the outer ring, we've got the inner tube, and then we've got what looks like a pretty solid sample from Rochette, which is very interesting. And I wasn't sure. I was like, okay, maybe this is just a fluke. And so I looked at the rest of the images that came down. And this is an image from September 1st, Sol 190 at a mean solar time, like an hour later after the image of that previous image was shown. And we still have our drill bit, and we still have our our serial number, but now the tube is empty. And so what I'm hoping happened is that the sample was a solid sample and brought in and stowed properly, because it looks like it was a really promising sample, to be honest with you. So here's them side by side. We have our very clear, obvious sample in the tube, and then we have an empty tube about an hour later. So they haven't said anything, and I'm anxiously awaiting some sort of news, but I think they might have done it.
This is amazing, Marley. I love that you are literally breaking news here. NASA has not released this. Marley was nerding out on the raw data that was released, which is very unique to recent NASA missions, isn't Marley? Because before, raw images would go down to the scientists, they would process them, and maybe months and months later, maybe a newspaper might print a photo. But now you're literally getting the photos before any news release is ever released.
Yeah, they bring them down. They do this also with the Juno mission. The camera on the Juno mission, all the data becomes available pretty soon after the photos are taken. And that also has a lot to do with advanced technology. They're able to, process them into image format a bit better now. And so, but yeah, like people can go find this on like the Mars 2020 website. If you go to images and raw image, a bunch of them will show up, and you can filter it by instrument, camera, and stuff. Yeah, anyways, yeah, it was very exciting hour for me going through the photos. But yeah, I think they might have done it.
Awesome, very exciting. We also got some questions coming in on the microorganisms, also other questions coming in as well. So if you're out there watching and you have any question about space plants, about drilling for rocks on Mars, throw them into the chat. We've got about 15 more minutes with Marley in this episode. So let's go back just for a second, and we'll leave Mars temporarily and go back to some plants, because Keith has a question about other types of organisms that don't need light. Is there any research being done on any kind of like fungi that might be growing, that we could grow maybe in space, like mushrooms? Can we do any of that kind of research?
Okay, so I think that we possibly could, but from my understanding, and like PSA, I am not a botanist, like I am not Mark Watney. So my
I don't think Mark
understanding
Watney was
of
a
botany,
botanist either.
no, he was a botanist and an engineer. That's why he was able
was
to
he?
grow potatoes. Yeah.
Okay.
But so my understanding is a bit shaky, but when a lot of it has to do with the root systems. So the plants growing right now are in little pillows that have air and water and soil in them, because and they're specially watered, because when you look at water in space, it forms like those bubbles, right? And so if you were to just put that on roots, it would just drown immediately. Like it would drown. There'd be nowhere to get air. It'd have water all around it. And so they have to be very carefully aerated and watered and have the soil in certain ways around them. And I think the problem with fungi might have to do with the root systems. And also fungi grow largely on decaying material, which is difficult. And another problem with fungi may also be the spores. If those get into the air filtration system on board the International Space Station, it could cause some problems. So I'm not aware of any research going on fungi right now. Right now, it is mostly the leafy greens and things like that. But it could be, like, it is a good thing to consider. But I also think they'll probably stick with the leafy greens, because the light also adds a psychological benefit for the astronauts as well. If you were to grow most things like in a dark room, I don't know, kind of be a bummer, but there's a balance between the two.
I was going to ask Keith if he had been watching Star Trek Discovery, because there is a connection between fungi and space travel, which Pride, of course, has put in, that fungus needs mycelium space. I'm not going to put any spoilers, but if you haven't watched Star Trek Discovery, lots of connections between mushrooms, fungus, and interstellar travel. Let's go to another question from Steve. So completely off topic here, but of course on topic for space. So recently I was out, looking up at the stars. I was looking up at a giant red sun, Arcturus, recently. So giant red sun, red, potentially nearing its end of its life, red meaning sort of like a little bit older than, say, our sun. So Steve's question is about Betelgeuse, which is another red supergiant. Is it possible to know when Betelgeuse bursts into a supernova by judging only by neutrinos? Or so could we get like any advanced knowledge of what's going on with Betelgeuse before we actually visually see it explode?
Ooh, that's a really interesting question. And I think, okay, so I know that this has been done before when they got one of the gravitational wave signals came in, and everyone in the world, like all astronomers and telescopes, pointed to one region of the sky and were able to see a very bright event happen. But that was because of a gravitational wave detection. I don't know if that would be able to happen with neutrinos, because neutrinos still move at the speed of light, and so would all the photons that we would see coming from the supernova event is what we would also see. So I don't think we would get advanced notice from neutrinos. Also, they're notoriously difficult to detect. We have a better understanding of them now, but they're still very hard. I think we would have to have a different mechanism like gravitational waves, which wouldn't happen. I don't think it's big enough. We're not sensitive enough to that level to be able to get advanced warning. I know like the most advanced warning we would get like a while ago, astronomers were very excited because Betelgeuse was like dimming and then brightening, and everyone was very excited. It'd have to be something like that to give us a warning. I don't think neutrinos would do it. No.
Right. So that dimming event happened a couple of years ago, and certainly that did cause some discussion about what was actually happening with Betelgeuse. Now, would that actually be an indicator that Betelgeuse was going to explode? Of course, it didn't explode. Betelgeuse was still there, and it only dimmed temporarily and then came back up to its full brightness. So, is there any kind of indication, or are we really just like we are behest to time? And the light energy takes time to travel, and we just got to wait for it.
Yeah, I think that one. Yeah, we're gonna just have to wait. Like, I don't think there's any real thing. It's like 1 minute it'd be a normal star, and then one it'd be just super bright, And I think we just have to wait for that to happen, because it dimming was weird. Everyone was like, "What is going on? Could this be a supernova?" Because we've never really seen. I think the last one was like an 89 that we were able to see. So it's really an unexplored thing, because it happens probably more than we think, but they're so far away we haven't seen them.
Right. And we have observed them happening in other galaxies, right? But of course, we're not observing specific stars in other galaxies. They're so far away. We're talking about stars in our own Milky Way, correct?
Yeah.
Great. So we've got about 9 minutes left. There was another follow-up question. So just to recap from MyCap Nerd. So fungal plants at the moment are not being grown on the ISS at all, right?
Not that I know of, no.
Okay, yeah. So just wanted to clarify that. Hopefully soon, though, so that we can get to that mycelium network for Pride. But we do have one more story. Did you want to get into that other bonus story for us today, Marley? So let's go back to the International Space Station, and perhaps even get to some, pardon the pun, breaking news of the other sort that's happening to a attachment on the International Space Station.
Yes. So this big thing is what's called an exploded configuration of the International Space Station. And so this is as of August 2019. It's a bit out of date. For example, the one of the elements pending launch in pink, this one here, is the NUCA multi-purpose laboratory module, which has launched and did attach. It was very eventful, caused the whole spin. Big deal. So a bit out of date, but pretty much good. And so what has happened is there's another part under particular concern, and that is the circled module here, or the Zarya module. And because it's starting to have some cracks in it. So a bit of history about the Zarya is that it is the module Zarya. It means Russian for dawn, and it's also known as the functional cargo block, or by the Russian acronym FGB. And it was the first module of the International Space Station to be launched in 1998. And so it is Russian made and US owned. And in the initial stages of the space station, as it was being built, it provided the electrical power, the storage, the propulsion, the guidance. It provided a ton of things. But as more of the space station was added, its jobs got delegated to different parts. And so now it mainly is just used as a storage part. But it is still the fundamental starting and storage and like middle point for the Russian side of the space station. So what started to happen is that they've detected cracks in the module, and they're very, very small, like less than the width of a human hair. They're superficial, but it's unclear on how they were created and unclear how damaging they are. And it's also been, confirmed that it does suggest that the fissures will spread over time on the module. And so a lot of it is probably just has to do with how old the module itself is. So a lot of parts on the space station only have a 15-year warranty on them. And so we're definitely reaching that and a bit past that. A lot of the missions are servicing missions, the spacewalks, to keep things up to date. But with these cracks, it starts, the talks of what are we going to do with the space station and the bits that get very old, because this isn't the only part of the space station that's been causing problems. There are a lot. They're circled here that have done damage or have been damaged. We have the Zarya module, we have the Zvezda module, the Nauka laboratory, which had that unplanned thruster movement, and we have the Canada Arm 2. And so these are all parts of the space station that have been damaged in some way. And that's not including, all of the oxygen level, the oxygen system shutting down suddenly, or the space debris and the the possibility of bailing out of the space station itself. So it's getting very old, the space station. And the Zvezda module was launched, which is the bottom one in this picture, was launched in July 2000, and it had a leak in September 2019. It was a very small leak. It wasn't delegated a big problem, very low on the things of maintenance to do. Zvezda was the third module launch, and at the time it provided living quarters, support, systems, electrical power distribution, data process, like tons and tons of things. And now it does still have some sleeping quarters for the astronauts, but it is still the structural center of the Russian internet segment. And they detected another air pressure drop as a result of an air leak on July 31st, again, after the leak in September 2019, which was patched in October 2020, leaked again in March 2020, which they went and tried to patch, and has now started leaking again as of July 31st. And so these two cracks are only just slightly wider than the width of a typical human hair, but still pose a big problem for this aging space station. As it gets older, cracks appear, and eventually we're not going to be able to fix all of them as the parts get too old to be maintained. The next bit also is like the Canada arm, which we talked about before, Canada arm 2, when it got a hole in it due to space debris. It didn't cause any damage, but it does start to, will it continue into a larger hole? Will it cause more damage? This isn't mentioning the ones that, failure of oxygen generators, that one time in 2011 when there was space debris approaching the space station, and they had 15 hours until closest approach, which wasn't enough time to actually move the station out of the way. And so all of the crew had to suit up and get into Soyuz capsules and close the hatches and be ready to undock and return to Earth in case of collision, which luckily didn't happen and the crew could return to work, but this does become a larger problem with more space debris in the air. And so the first piece launched was in 98, and many modules have a 15-year lifespan, like I said. And so the current framework for the International Space Station as it ages is that the US has authorized operation to extend into 2030 with funding secured till about 2025. But Roscosmos has said they're only going to continue with the space station until 2024. And so now a big talk is how to, disable the space station and deorbit it safely to bring it back down to Earth, as they've always been committed to doing that, but now it's become an actual thing that they have to deal with.
Okay, so what we're talking about here, we're just talking about basic entropy. Things are getting older, like we all are, Marley. I know you've got many more years, but my back is starting to hurt. The International Space Station is starting to creak, get some cracks and get some leaks. But they had already been planned for that. That's why the lunar gateway is already starting to plan. The end of the International Space Station's life has already been starting to be thought about. So this isn't really surprise news, but hopefully we can still get some life out of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that they've extended it until 2030, I know there's discussions about trying to get private funding to keep the space station going, but it's just sad that something so old, a piece all the way from 98 is like finally giving in, which is to be anticipated. I think Roscosmos said that by 2025, it's going to be just like broken. Like it's going to cost more to fix than to do anything with. And Roscosmos has talked about possibly building another space station around Earth, using some of the newer parts from their section of the International Space Station. But that's still all under wraps and under debate until about 2024, I think.
I just realized that the car that I drive is actually from 1998. So perhaps there is some parallels between my car, which is also kind of breaking down. I wonder what'll last longer, my car or the International Space Station. To be determined, perhaps in a future Ask an Astronomer episode. Thank you all so much for joining us out there on YouTube land. If you're watching out on Telus Optic, come on by here 2 p.m. every second Thursday. We are getting close to equinox later on this month. Of course, a lot of kids going back to school. Hopefully we'll see some kids here. We're going to keep this time slot 2 p.m. Every second Thursday. And for those that love our online programs, we've got a really cool online cosmic night coming up on Wednesday, September 15th. We have a special guest, Eldon Yellowhorn from SFU, and he's an archaeologist, and he actually specializes in something called archaeoastronomy. So we are going to be taking a look at some different historical perspectives on astronomy. You know, we look up at the sky and we see a lot of those constellations that have Greek and Roman names, but there are a lot more cultures on this planet than just those two. So we're going to have a look at some different cultures that have looked up at the sky just like we all do. And hopefully you get out there. We have some clear skies over here on the West Coast. Wherever you are, hopefully you have some clear skies. And for me and Marley here at the MacMillan Space Center, we'll see you next time.